Terminator 2D No Fate is coming out on October 31st, 2025 for modern consoles. To get ready for launch, let's go through the highs and lows of the 16-bit generation side-scrolling Terminator games, which include the Terminator for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and Sega CD, as well as Terminator 2 Judgment Day for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Stay tuned after the review of these retro titles to dive into a brief commentary on the up-and-coming pixel art revival of the Terminator franchise. And without further ado, the Terminator games are presented in order from best to worst. And since you know I like my dessert first up is Terminator for the Sega CD. The Terminator for the Sega CD is a side-scrolling action platformer. You have freedom of movement in all directions and can also shoot in all directions. The controls are easy to learn and relatively tight. Compared to the other Terminator games, this version has the best controls and level design. In fact, from the very beginning, it becomes very quickly apparent that this version of the Terminator is the superior one. Something about it from the get-go just feels right. You can essentially just begin focusing on the nicely balanced action and fun. In total, the game has 10 different levels to work your way through. The levels are fairly linear. This won't be confused with an adventure game at any point, but it isn't 100% straightforward either. Throughout the levels, you have various items you can pick up, to include health, a force field shield, and weapon upgrades. Some of these items are found off the beaten path, which encourages exploration. And since the game is fun, and weapon power-ups are glorious, you'll definitely want to explore around. The enemies vary from Terminators to machines to 80s-style punks. There's also a Terminator dog. So, there's that. I guess even cybernetic organisms need a best friend? Most enemies aren't too challenging to dispatch, and generally, once they're defeated, they're toast. The game doesn't endlessly respawn enemies. You have unlimited ammunition and never have to reload. This keeps the action moving at a brisk pace. The weapon upgrades are borderline necessary for some of the game's later enemies, and some of the weapon upgrades don't make much sense, like the machine gun pump-action shotgun, or the fireball shooting shotgun. But they're fun to use, and my advice would be to just enjoy the ride. The game also keeps the momentum of the action going, even if you lose a life during a level. There is no penalty downgrading your primary weapon if you lose a life. The only boss type enemy is the T-800, who appears at several points throughout the game. For the Arnold variant of the T-800, you just blast him slightly off screen with your upgraded shotgun. It's not too complex. There really is no other safe way to deal with him too, as you won't win a straight out gun battle. The lack of boss variety is a disappointing aspect of the game, although it technically matches the movie more accurately. Terminator for the Sega CD does have its gameplay quirks. There are some random moments that pop up with little explanation as to what you're supposed to do, like having to shoot this button to drop a wall and continue through the level. The button is fairly obvious, but this type of mechanism wasn't something that was previously used in the game. So when it showed up later in the game, it made it slightly confusing. There's also a section where you have to jump up into a tube to be carried upward to the next platform. I'm fine with having to do this, but there's nothing indicating this is what you're supposed to do. I was wandering around the level, trying to figure out where to go, when I accidentally jumped into the tube. When it happened, I was shouting to myself, "What in the Hoover just happened?" Which isn't something one wants to be caught saying when one is alone. Another strange aspect of the game is the damage you take from touching an enemy. For some reason, physical contact depletes your energy faster than bullets or explosions, especially contact with the T-800. One touch, Death City. A final knock on the game, and perhaps just a personal pet peeve, is the inclusion of ladder-to-ladder jumping. I think this type of gameplay is why my inner child still has unhealed trauma. Although not on a ladder, there's another part where you are riding what I like to call a giant claw machine, and the claw machine opens up at certain points, requiring you to jump when it opens and land when it closes. Otherwise, you're dropped several levels down. Much like those horde claw machines at arcades, I wasn't good at this part either. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of heavy platforming, but others' mileage may vary. With regard to artistic style, the Sega CD has a stronger CPU and more RAM than the Genesis, but apparently that didn't improve its capability with colors. That may be true, but one thing's for certain, the Terminator on Sega CD by far has the best artistic style compared to all of the other 16-bit Terminator games. Just look at the character sprite of Kyle Reese compared to the Super Nintendo and Genesis version. Reese looks the best in the Sega CD version, and it isn't even close. Even comparing Sega CD's Reese to the character sprites of Arnold in the Terminator 2 Judgment Day games is an easy win, although I know that's far from a high compliment given the competition. The use of colors on each level stands out as being superior and also felt more appropriate for a game based on the movie version of the Terminator. Another strong suit for the Sega CD, and perhaps because of the additional RAM, was the quality and variety of animations. The Sega CD has more things going on screen than the other versions, and looks better while doing so. Seriously, the art design is oh so good. Cloudy, moonlit skies, puddles in the streets with reflections, apartments with lights on, a TV on, traffic lights changing, and Kyle Reese's coat flapping in the wind as he runs along. The animation is just superb. Being CD-based, the Sega CD had a seriously potential leg up on the competition when it came to in-game music and sound effects. And the Sega CD version stuck the landing. The music makes me want to skip the next 12 months of barbershop appointments and start a hair band in the best of ways. If the power of the Sega CD was giving the graphics a bump, the sound and sound effects were placed on steroids. Almost every level is filled with absolutely energizing music. The gunshots and explosions sound great too. But really, those strong 80s synth sounds are amazing. If I did have to nitpick the music a bit, the Tech Noir level remixes a sound drop from the movie. And this is not done to great effect. Rather, it's grating to the ears.
It's just him and me and me.
But it's the lone failure in the sound department. Another very minor complaint comes from the music in the later levels. The story is reaching its climax, but the music, for the most part, keeps pumping at the same energized tone and pace as the rest of the game, making it tonally off. This is obviously a super slight nitpick. In fact, if the rest of the game's music wasn't so fantastic, I wouldn't have even really thought of that gripe. The bar was just set so high, so my expectations rose with it. For story, Terminator for the Sega CD follows the film. The Sega CD version differentiates itself, though, through its story presentation, which comes from visual-only cinematics straight from the film. There's an opening, clips between levels, and an ending. Gotta love lots and lots of grain for this. Enough for a sandwich. Transporting yourself back in time, though, having clips from a movie in a video game was novel and attention-getting. I can't imagine being impressed by the quality of the video even then, as you can barely tell what's going on. But people of a certain age will certainly appreciate the history of full-motion video clips. Does the Terminator for the Sega CD have that short game energy and quality of life features needed to fit into your busy schedule? Let's find out. There are no save points or level passwords in the game. If you lose all of your lives, back to the beginning you go. There are checkpoints in each level, and they are reasonably spread throughout each level in the form of a pole that lights up once you pass through it. With regard to difficulty, the game is generally fair, but it is not easy. There are some moments when it isn't immediately clear what you're supposed to do, but for the most part the challenge is balanced. It should be noted that weapon upgrades are borderline essential to progress in the game, and you will have a horrid time trying to advance without them. You will also die a decent amount in the game, and going back to the beginning from later levels could inspire some good old-fashioned controller smashing, as could the one-hit deaths from the flame-throwing robots or from high-fiving the T-800. There is a saving grace to all of this, though. The game does have some solid quality of life hacks. Through some codes entered at the start menu, it opens up a debug menu. There, you can get extra lives, you can select a level, choose your weapon strength, and select the amount of grenades with which you want to begin a level. The level select is by far the most appreciated as it takes away the threat of losing an hour of progress because you took the wrong step or got flame broiled. For game length, each level takes about 15 to 20 minutes to beat. It could be quicker if you don't explore it all and if you know where you're going. With 10 levels overall, you're easily looking at over 2 hours to beat the game. If you choose to play without codes, the game may take much longer as you learn each level's strategies and return post-death to get past those difficult parts. Use that level select to make the game fit with your busy life. The cost of the Terminator for Sega CD hurts if you're collecting physically for the game. Cheap versions, disc only, run $50 to $60, with complete versions running into the hundreds. Overall, SGE highly recommended. Terminator for the Sega Genesis is coming in at the number 2 spot. The game is mainly a side-scrolling shooter with a bit of platforming at times. But before we get to any shooting, the beginning of the first level needs to be discussed. Never having played the game, I started level 1 and was confused about which button brought out your gun. Turns out, you don't start with a gun. You are simply supplied with an endless amount of grenades. And this is when I almost quit. I didn't know a gun was coming. I thought this was maybe how Genesis does things. The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the Super Nintendo is an action platformer with traditional melee attacks, while the Genesis version has you throwing batarangs endlessly. I thought maybe Sega's developers thought throwing things was a good way to differentiate between the systems. Who knows? But thankfully, I was wrong. You are forced to go through a long slog of grenade tossing to clear a horde of Terminator clones, though. And I mean an endlessly respawning horde. You have to force yourself to move forward to progress through the level. Otherwise, the Terminators keep respawning and you're at a stalemate. Inch forward, toss grenades. Inch forward, toss grenades. Inch forward, toss grenades. And just as you reach your tipping point and you're ready to rip this cartridge out of your system and feed it into a raging fire, you get to what I believe is an Uzi or some type of automatic weapon. But for the sake of this game and as a tie-in to the movie, I'll call it an Uzi. And all of the pain and suffering you endured getting through the grenade gauntlet is about to be turned into great vengeance and furious anger. This thing just shreds Terminators, and I'm here for it. It immediately put a smile on my face as I toasted enemy after enemy. Is the gun ridiculously overpowered? Yes. And a profound thank you goes to the developers for rewarding my patience. Don't think on the fact that such a gun is able to absolutely obliterate a Terminator with a round or two. Just go about the destruction and delight in your destructive ways. The level is now yours. When Kyle Reese shoots on the Genesis version of the Terminator, he shoots straight to the left or to the right. No angles. This definitely affects the strategies you apply when going after enemies. If you meet an enemy on a stairwell, you're in for some serious problems. Beyond level 1, Kyle's primary weapon becomes a shotgun. Although not as powerful as the Uzi, it still packs a punch and can be fired rapidly. Enemies go down fairly easily, although you still shouldn't run full speed into the action. Some enemies fire weapons while others throw Molotov cocktails. These enemies require different approaches. You'll also encounter police. The game seems to want to confirm Kyle Reese is a good guy, so when the bad guys are plugged, they're dead and gone. When the police are shot, they drop only to rise soon after. Perhaps good body armor? Who knows? But here's a pro tip. Enemies drop health replenishment items. If you are hurting for health and don't want to risk dying and going through the grenade gauntlet again, just keep attacking the police. They'll keep falling down, getting back up, and eventually will drop a health replenishment item. Grab the item, then you're back in business. Another enemy you'll face is an attack helicopter. This shoots at you while you're on the rooftops. You can just jump and dodge the bullets though, and proceed forward, unlike the SNES version, which will be discussed later in this video. The Terminator for the Sega Genesis has to be one of the few select games that begins with a boss fight. Your first enemy is a destroyer tank. After that, the T-800 is the only boss character you will face. You'll actually face the T-800 in 3 separate levels, although only twice as the Arnold variant. For the Arnold variant, you just have to get by him. So you just shoot him repeatedly until he drops down, starts blinking, and then you go forward. The game in total has 4 levels. So yeah, this game is definitely short and for the most part, very linear. The second level, the Streets of LA, lets you choose between going on the rooftops or going through the streets, but that's about it. Having optional routes is a nice touch though. With regard to artistic style, Kyle Reese's character sprite is a bit awkward in the Genesis version of the Terminator. He starts out wearing very generic army greens, like he raided a deserted military supply store in the future. Once he travels to the present, he apparently just throws on a white trench coat over his army greens. You can still see the greens beneath the trench coat when he runs. He's also wearing the same shoes from the future. This really wouldn't require a commentary, except the game places a cutscene after level 1 depicting Reese naked on the street, which is from the movie. Perhaps Reese went back in time, found this outfit, died, is born in the future, grows up, joins the Resistance, and comes across this outfit again. Sans coat. It could happen. The character sprites in the game are animated decently, but definitely lean toward the stiffer side of things. Reese jogs and bunny hops his way through the levels with decent smoothness. The character sprite is a good size, and unlike the SNES version, Reese isn't faced with an endless amount of cheap shots, so the larger character size actually works well. The art design of the levels is also generally a positive trait here. You have an above-ground disaster area, which is dark and gloomy, an underground facility with nice parallax scrolling, city streets with buildings, objects in the foreground, lights on in the windows and doorways, even a garbage can to hop over, a bar with neon lights, a police precinct with jail cells, posters on the wall, etc., etc. You even encounter an homage to the man of the hour himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in his Terminator glory. All of the levels come with their own feel and are easily differentiated from each other with regard to design. Beyond that, there are animated effects in each level, from alarm lights, to spinning fan blades, to flowing chemicals, to moving factory components and blinking lights. There definitely was some love and attention that went into the design of the game, and it makes the game all the better for it. One complaint I have with regard to art style is the use of color on the Genesis version. The game tends to have some vibrant colors, which helps to add contrast to the scenes, but the aesthetic does seem too colorful when the movie was a bit darker in tone. This isn't really a major gripe though. Most of the music in the game is faster paced and is reminiscent of 80s music. Heavy on the synthesizer, as is the want for the Genesis. The music matches the pace of the game, fast and furious. If you time it right, you can actually get Reese running to the beat. The only track from the film is heard during the opening credits. The rest of the game's music fits well though. Sound effects are also solid. You have a countdown timer, decent grenade explosion sounds, good laser shooting, and the Uzi sounds badass, as does the shotgun. There aren't a ton of other sound effects at play, but what's here is solid and generally adds to the game. The story follows a plot of the movie as you roll through the different levels. There's the future, streets of LA, tech noir, the police station, and the factory. In between levels, there are still art cutscenes with text conversation. The art is a bit funky looking and worth a chuckle, but is recognizable from sections of the movie. Does the Terminator for the Sega Genesis have that short game energy and quality of life features needed to fit into your busy schedule? Let's find out. There are no save points or level passwords in the game. There are no checkpoints as you are only allotted 1 life in the game. You die, game over. With regard to difficulty, you will die repeatedly. However, there's always a feeling that the game is manageable if you just learn the patterns, which ends up holding true. The game is without a doubt a challenge, but overall doesn't feel unnecessarily hard. There are no quality of life hacks for the game, no cheat codes. With regard to game length, you should expect an hour or two to be devoted to the game to beat it. True, it does take only about 20 minutes to beat the game, but that's once you know how to play the game and you know how to approach each level. Although replay value isn't going to be the Terminator for Sega Genesis's strongest suit, the game does have its undeniable charms. The levels are fairly straightforward, which hurts replay value a bit, but the game is very quick and can be a fun challenge. So it might be something that's worth picking up a time or two into the future. You're probably not going to run it back right away after you beat it though. The Terminator for the Sega Genesis isn't too expensive. For a loose copy, it's going to run you $15 to $25. For the complete version, probably around $50. The Terminator for the Super Nintendo comes in at the number 3 spot on this list. This one had me truly disappointed. When I first started the game, I found the artistic design pleasant and the gameplay to be pretty fun. You start in the future, much like the Genesis and Sega CD versions. And the gameplay mirrors that of most side-scrolling shooters, which is something I very much enjoy. You could shoot at all angles except for straight up and down, but okay, no big deal. Even within a minute or so, you can tell there is some variety to the enemies. You have various Terminators, snake-like creatures, satellites, hunter-killers, and a destroyer tank. The SNES version of the Terminator has several mid-level boss battles with a hunter-killer, a destroyer tank, and a helicopter. The other 16-bit Terminator games skipped mid-level bosses, so it was nice to have some larger-scale battles to spice things up. To fight enemies, you start out with a plasma rifle. I wonder if it's in the 40-watt range. That's your primary weapon, and you can pick up grenades and rockets. After you leave the future, your primary weapon is replaced with a shotgun. So there isn't a ton of variety with weapons in the game, but I thought the gameplay had enough potential that it wouldn't matter too much. The game includes permadeath for enemies, so you don't have to worry about endless respawning, like the Genesis version of the Terminator, or the Terminator 2 variants, which is nice, as you could potentially take your foot off the gas for a bit to take in the game at a less frenetic pace. Beyond side-scrolling, there are other modes of play, including riding in the bed of a pickup and driving missions. Now, you may have noticed I showed pictures from the manual instead of gameplay for the driving missions. And this brings me to my disappointment. I could not get past level 2. The game is so infuriatingly hard and cheap at times that I was on a rinse and repeat cycle of gameplay and death. Eventually, I had to choose between investing endless hours into a frustrating game or call it quits. I chose the latter, which is disappointing, as I do believe there is a decent game here beneath the frustration. The reality check for the game becomes apparent even within level 1. Enemies are super quick with their trigger fingers, often sending rounds your way as soon as a fraction of a pixel is on screen. This results in a lot, and I mean a lot, of cheap hits. You have a life meter, and that meter sustains more than a single hit, and can be replenished with health items. But there are so many cheap hits that you start to realize the only way to advance in the game safely is to creep forward through each level. And when I say creep, I mean baby steps creep, while never letting up on the trigger. As this game is definitely an action, not a survival game, this creep tactic takes whatever fun you were having and tosses it into a hydraulic press. Even the aforementioned being a gunner in the back of a pickup isn't much fun, because you control the acceleration, braking, aiming, and shooting, to include hitting enemy incoming fire and the enemies themselves, which is just too much when the controls aren't very precise or responsive. You're bound to get hit, even if you're careful. Level 2 eases on the cheap shots a little bit, but replaces it with some questionable jumping and platforming that results in more death. There are some blind and or cheap jumps that you have to make, and some of these deaths invariably lead you down to the concrete. Also in level 2 is a mind-boggling firefight with an attack helicopter. Reese climbs to the rooftop of a building and becomes literally frozen to his spot and can only turn from side to side to shoot the helicopter. I initially thought I had encountered a game bug. Turns out the game is just a bug. You invariably will get hit by the helicopter's fire. You can defeat it, but the fight basically serves as a life-taking or health-draining device. What was the thinking here? Like, come on. I can picture the programmers thinking a helicopter battle sounded awesome. And then they decided to cement your sneakers to the roof. Did they not get enough sleep? Did James Cameron insult their mothers? Like, why program it like this? The artistic style of the game varies. Level 1 is a dark and dismal artistic design to replicate the future in which Skynet has taken over and destroyed much of civilization. It's fitting and got me excited for the game. Even later in the level, when Reese is on the back of the pickup itself has various signs of battle damage. Great attention to detail. Parallax scrolling with skulls in the foreground also adds further to the artistic design of the game. Reese's character sprite is 80s workout video-esque, including a matching bandana. If Reese wasn't fighting for the Resistance, he was definitely a member of Curls for the Girls. I can't say the character looks like Michael Biehn from the movie, but it does its job, I guess. Level 2 has a bit more of a cartoonish vibe with color and environment. It's not really befitting of the movie, but the colors pop decently at least. The character sprite once again doesn't resemble Reese at all. Going back to some level 1 enemies, some of the Terminators appear as human, but after a few shots, some of the metal endoskeleton is exposed, which is a fantastic detail from this video game generation. Other Terminators are blown in half, leaving the remaining torso crawling after you. Another amazing touch. For the music and sound effects, overall it's decent, nothing that stands out. The music sets a decent tone for an action-oriented game. The sounds of the gun are your typical video game laser gun sounds from the 90s. The sound of the gun from the laser is fine on its own, but considering that in order to have any chance of survival in the game, you need to constantly, and I mean constantly, fire at certain points. The laser sound quickly becomes grating. Also, why does Reese have a similar laser sound effect when he jumps? Is my man using a propulsion pogo stick system? It's just more laser noise, which once again becomes more grating. The sounds of the shotgun in level 2 have a reasonably sounding blast. And you don't need to unleash constant fire, at least compared to level 1, so it doesn't wear on you as much. For story, the game mainly follows the Terminator movie. There are some brief cutscenes for the Super Nintendo version, and the story takes place in the future, the streets of LA, with some driving sequences, a police station, and also an industrial complex. But once again, I didn't get that far in the game, so I can't really attest to those later levels. Does the Terminator for the Super Nintendo have that short game energy and quality of life features needed to fit into your busy schedule? Let's find out. The game has no save points and is meant to be played in a single sitting, as there are no level passwords either. There are checkpoints in the game that let you start from them once you've passed a certain point, should you have any lives remaining. You start with 5 lives, and you can collect additional lives, but the game tends to take them from you quicker than you can collect them. The checkpoints are a little too few and far between though, which can get frustrating. The game's overall difficulty level is very high. There are brief moments when it isn't too bad, but the boss fights, long levels, and extremely cheap hits make it very challenging and frustrating to succeed. There are health replenishing items scattered throughout the level, but these only seem to prolong death just a bit more. There are no quality of life hacks, otherwise known as codes, to ease your frustrations with the game. There isn't even an ability to find a way to jump to a specific level. Considering the difficulty of the game, this really is a disservice to any players. For game length, I can't really attest to how long this would take to beat. I tried over and over and over, but I stopped myself at level 2. Level 1 took a long time to master, and level 2 appeared to be setting up the same requirement. I feel that with significant time invested and some super careful gameplay, I could have probably beaten the game. With that said, it would have taken a lot of trial and error, which adds a lot to game length, but not necessarily to game worth. There isn't much replay value for the Terminator on the Super Nintendo either. You have to start from level 1 every single time, and the forced slow creeping through each level and the inability to jump to a level of your choosing doesn't really add to any type of replay value, unless you crave increasing your blood pressure for a slick get out of work and go see a doctor day. For you physical collectors out there, loose versions are going to set you back about $20, while complete versions may run you well over $100. Overall, SGE not recommended. Terminator 2 Judgment Day for the Super Nintendo and Genesis are nearly identical, so I'm going to cover them as one game, primarily using the Super Nintendo version as the color palette is a bit more diverse. And with that, the Super Nintendo version takes the 4th spot in this list, because of that slightly better artistic design, and the Genesis version slots into last place at number 5. For gameplay, it's a side-scrolling shooter, much like the others. You lumber and skip jump. Yeah, you heard me. Just look at this, your way through the levels. You will have access to such weapons as a pistol, shotgun, rifle, and a minigun. You also have a melee attack. which is utterly useless. It's like instead of having Arnold's strength match his body, they gave him my personal strength, and I'm built like the human version of Gumby. On top of that, hit detection is absolutely comical. You can stand next to someone and punch right through them. They're just fine. The weapons have a nice variety, but I didn't get much joy from using them. Enemies endlessly respawn, and that gets old real quick, which also contributes to the lack of joy from the weapons. At least your soul can rest easy knowing the shotgun blast to the chest you just gave to the local cop or biker gang member didn't cause any death. Each level has objectives, with the side-scrolling stages having multiple objectives at times. One common objective is to collect Terminator parts from the future, because somehow Cyberdyne didn't recover all of the parts from the first Terminator, so now they are scattered all over the different locations throughout the game. And that's a plot twist, I guess. Other objectives include finding addresses or protecting John and Sarah Connor. On the first level, your objective is to find John's address, and you do this by going into a phone booth and looking up. That's right, someone must have pasted the Yellow Pages sheet of John Connor onto the ceiling of the phone booth. Nothing creepy about that. Protecting John and Sarah is no cakewalk either. First off, you need to have them follow you by pausing the game and changing the option that has them follow you. Initially, I was walking around John and wondering why he didn't want to follow a large, middle-aged man with a gun. And then I realized, oh wait, I just need to exit the gameplay and change the option from the start menu. Anyway, it's cool the game included them, as they're essential to the plot, but even more modern games have struggled with annoying protection mission. Looking at you, GameCube Resident Evil 4. John and Sarah can easily die also, and if they die, game over, back to the beginning with you. There are some destructible environments like at the garage beneath the mall. Cars blow up when shot. It's a nice touch added to the game. Even beyond that, at the Cyberdyne level, one of the objectives is to cause the building as much damage as possible to aid in the destruction of the building. So the developers actually connected in-game damage to the environments to an objective. Pretty cool. I love when a game adds different modes of gameplay. As a kid, if you told me I could walk around, blow stuff up, and then drive a motorcycle or police van to my next destination, I'd be pumped. But even younger me would have given up with these driving sections. They're notorious for their awful, awful controls. The Super Nintendo version makes you hit a button and the D-pad to change direction. Half the time, it doesn't even work. Why have the additional button press at all? The Genesis version gives you a little more free reign over your vehicle controls, but somehow it's equally bad. The controls are twitchy and imprecise. Other vehicles ram you, you could barely avoid them, and the police are constantly trying to ram into you too. Don't forget it's one life and game over. These levels are almost worth playing just to experience how truly awful they are. It's next level. The artistic style of the game is best described as plain. The game makes decent use of colors, but in no way stands out. There's no vibe or style conveyed with the graphic design. It's just plain. Backgrounds lack sufficient detail, and the character sprites don't stand out in any way. On the design front, this was definitely not a maximum effort. There are some nice graphical touches that are added, such as the destructible environments, which was somewhat of a rare quality for the 16-bit generation. For the driving levels, none of these levels would be what anyone would call masterpieces of artistic expression. The sprites are small and basically detailless. The music for the game is energetic and mildly catchy, but there aren't many tracks, with many of the tracks being used repeatedly throughout the entire game. There is a standout though, and that's from the final level. There's a take on some music from the Terminator movie that's really well done and actually fits the mood for the final level of the game very well. It's a rare highlight for this game. The sound effects are mildly acceptable, at best. There's nothing to write home about here. The shotgun and minigun sound decently enough, so there's that, but the pistol sounds downright awful. When someone gets shot and is wounded, the character does make a sound, but the sound is very muffled, so it's not that impressive either. The story of the game follows the outline of the movie by retelling it in individual levels. There is a brief opening with Arnold in his birthday suit entering the bar. There are mission failure cutscenes, but beyond that, it's just the different levels that tell the story. So you have the bar, John's house, a mall, Enrique's weapon storage, Cyberdyne, and a steel mill. The driving missions are solely point-to-point travel and don't bring in any of the vehicle chase dynamics from the movie. Does Terminator 2 Judgment Day for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis have that short game energy and quality of life features needed to fit into your busy schedule? Let's find out. There are no save points in the game. There are no level passwords either. There are no mid-level checkpoints, as it's game over if you lose your one and only life. The difficulty level on this game is extremely frustrating. You have one life. One. Your system does reactivate if you die, but that's only to 50% power. It's a nice little movie tie-in, but with a game this frustrating, it's not enough. Enemies respawn endlessly, and those driving levels are pure rage smashing your controller fuel. The game does have some quality of life hacks, otherwise known as codes. This is one of the few positives about the game, is that the developers programmed in codes to allow you to become invincible, have endless ammo, or jump to different levels. Invincibility is not really a fun quality, as it takes most of the challenge of the game away, but skipping levels is definitely appreciated, since you'll probably die dozens of times in this abomination of a game. To beat the game, you're going to need at least an hour, and that's if you're really, really good at it. Some of the levels are extremely short, as in about a minute, maybe even less, but that's only if you know what you're doing. Especially on the driving levels, they can become very confusing, and it's super challenging to know where to go, and you could possibly spend a lot of time on those trying to learn the maps. Does the game have any replay value? What do you think? For you physical collectors out there, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is going to be a cheap pickup. On your Genesis and Super Nintendo, a loose cartridge is going to run you about $10 to $15. A complete edition for the Genesis, maybe about $30, and up to $60 or $70 for the Super Nintendo, although I can't imagine why you would ever want to do that. Overall, SGE, POS warning, stay away. Now it's time for a bit of Terminator 2D No Fate trailer analysis. Terminator 2 has several memorable characters, and the previous game solely went with a single protagonist. Terminator 2D seems to want to expand on that, so I'm excited for that opportunity. I hope the developers differentiate enough between the characters though, and it isn't just a sprite swap. Character sprite work and background seem to be done extremely well here in this pixel art style. The game is colorful and appears atmospheric, which has me really excited. There are also weather and simulated lighting effects to further envelop the players in the Terminator 2 world. Another aspect that has me excited is the mature rating for the game, which allows for gory and bloody violence if the game is arcade style. This gives me hope that the developers know their core audience skews between the 30 and 40-year-old range, maybe even higher. Boss battles were another factor most of the Terminator games lacked. Outside of the Super Nintendo version of the Terminator, mid-level boss battles or end-level boss battles weren't really a factor. Boss battles are a fun way to amp up the suspense and challenge of a game if they're done well. Terminator 2D seems to be recognizing this. Level variation is another factor that most of the Terminator games did well. Terminator 2D has 15 levels in total, so hopefully that gives the developers enough time to really show off that variety and different scenery. And as previously mentioned, varying up the gameplay is always a win if it's done right. Terminator 2D seems to offer some driving missions, and these can't possibly be as bad as Terminator 2 Judgment Days, right? Right? For Terminator 2D, the narrator mentions searching levels for bonus items and hidden weapons, so hopefully this brings a little more exploration to the Terminator games. Previously, the Sega CD version did allow you to explore around a little bit, but most of them have been pretty linear. It would be nice to see that expanded on a little bit. Terminator 2D also seems to have checkpoints, which is another plus for those not looking to become extremely frustrated when you're playing. The indicated controller layout for Terminator 2D seems to be pretty simple, which I applaud. I'm not really looking for something super complex in my 2D running and gunning, but I do like to have some variety, and they did add a melee attack here, so hopefully that adds a little spice to the gameplay. Another plus would be if they give an option to change your primary weapon during each level, or to add strength to it, which the Sega CD used to great effect. The Terminator 2D website indicates players will enjoy a cinematic soundtrack featuring recrafted music from the legendary T2 score and all new compositions. Here's fingers crossed to hoping that the developers came across the Sega CD version of the game and realized the power of having a great soundtrack. Terminator 2D No Fate is up for pre-order now. The regular version runs $59.99 US, which is expensive for a pixel art style game, but this is an aspect of life in 2025. Yes, I pre-ordered. Yes, I am one of those fools who pre-ordered the collector's edition for $120. Those art books always get me, but I do enjoy a solid steelbook too. Once the game is out, I plan on ripping right through it, as I am genuinely excited for this release. I'll post a review of the game and the accoutrement, and give some commentary on how it fares to previous versions once I've given it a good playthrough. In the meantime, if you have access to them, I highly recommend the Sega CD version or the Genesis version of the first Terminator game. Hasta la vista, baby.